You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, I am doing a special interview with Jason Reid from tellmystory.org. His team reached out and his son, 14 years old, committed suicide several years ago. And he set out on a mission to tell his son's story and tell their family's story. And since it's Mental Health Awareness Month, I think there's nothing better than to talk about what we need to know as parents, what we need to do as parents, and insight from someone who has been in the darkest of days as a parent, struggling with the loss of a son to suicide, what he thinks the rest of us need to be aware of. And I'm just so excited. I've never done an interview, so this is the very first interview I've ever done. I'm very protective of you all, and I get asked all the time, but I don't give them because I want the content to be appropriate and I want it to be through the lens of play therapy. But his mission aligns with what we believe. His mission agrees with the heart of the relationship we have with our kids. And for our awareness, I think we have to be educated and equipped. So I'm really excited to share this interview with you with Jason Reid from tellmystory.org. I hope you enjoy. This month is the Mental Health Awareness Month, and this is being recorded in May. And so I think that as a clinician and as a play therapist and as parents and as people who love kids, we have to take that seriously and know what that means for us. And it's one thing to see buildings lit up green and another thing to see green patches on baseball players' uniforms, but what does that mean practically speaking for us? And so for Mental Health Awareness Month, I can't think of anything better than to talk about the mental health of our kids and what that means for us as adults in their lives. And I typically don't do interviews. I'm asked all the time, and I usually say no to everyone, but I was approached by Jason Reid and his team, and I just really got behind what you all were talking about. And so I'm so excited to introduce Jason today. We're going to do an interview where he gets to share his story and hopefully encourage you all as parents and as caregivers to understand the value of your relationship with your kids and understanding their mental health and what we can do to make sure that it is healthy. And so Jason, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks for giving me some time today.
Well, Brenna, I'm honored to be here, especially since you don't usually do interviews. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and so it's interesting. I get asked all the time, and I'm really careful with my audience, and I'm very protective of the content that gets put out there with my name on it because there's a lot of junk in the world, and my audience is used to me and my lens, which is play therapy, and it's about the relationship with our kids. And so when I saw your story, that resonated and it clicked, and that usually doesn't happen. So I'm actually really happy to have you here. So if you don't mind, share with me a little bit about just who you are. And I know you're originally Canadian, but your backstory a little bit and a little bit about you.
Well, I am 56 years old and married for 30 years. I have 4 kids. Currently, my son is 26, getting married this year. My daughter is 23, getting married this year. And my son, Kyle, is 21, and he is trying to be a YouTube star. So he's having a lot of fun. In life.
That's fun, yes.
And we lost our son 5 years ago to suicide. Ryan was 14. In fact, he just turned 14. And we didn't see any of the signs because I wasn't thinking that mental health was an issue in my family and was something I had to look out for. It hadn't even crossed my mind as something I had to pay attention to. When I look back, knowing now what signs were, there were signs. Mm-hmm. I thought he was just grumpy because I had 4 kids and he was the least grumpy, in my opinion. But there was a lot going on behind the scenes that I didn't understand. Yeah. So after that happened, I went out and really made it my mission to try and make a difference. And the story goes somewhat like this is, when we got back the day after we took him off life support, or the day of actually, I wanted to make a difference. So I went out and said, what would I want people to do? And I I want people to choose life over death. So I went online to GoDaddy and found chooselife.org. And I'm like, well, that's available. That's weird. And it was $10,000. And I'm like, that's a lot of money. But I just was the moment. I just want to do that. It was 6 months later, someone told me, or 3 months later, they said, that's the old anti-abortion site. I'm like, oh.
I remember that. I remember that campaign.
Yeah. And it actually worked fine for a few years, because until this last 6 months ago, when things started heating up again. But when I launched that, I was very angry at the world, and a bit arrogant, probably very arrogant. And my mission was to end teen suicide by the year 2030. And I thought, well, everybody's doing this wrong. I'm a business guy. I built all these companies. I do all this stuff. I'll fix it. As I got into this space, I realized there's a lot of really, really good people, amazing people are working really, really hard to try to make a difference. And they're fantastic at what they do. The challenge is there's just not enough of us.
Yeah.
There's not enough therapists. There's not enough doctors, not enough psychiatrists, not enough, you name it, there's not enough of them, right? And we are in the middle of the greatest mental health crisis we've ever been in. Mm-hmm. So I went on to, I did a couple of TEDx talks. I did a Goalcast. I did a movie called Tell My Story. And COVID hit, and I was speaking via Zoom as much as I could. And now here's where we've landed, right? We landed in where I said is what we all agree is the biggest mental health crisis of our kids' lives, of our history. And it's hitting adults the same way. So, I kind of pivoted away from talking about suicide, because the reality is the chance of your son or daughter or child, cousin, nephew, whatever, is dying of suicide it's a small number. I mean, it's a big number. It's the second biggest killer of kids, but 10,000 kids a year is a big number, but a small number. So the chance of that happening to you is probably not going to happen. I hope not. I really do. But 40% of the kids today are experiencing some kind of, depending on what stats and where you want to get your stats from, it could be higher, it could be a little lower, but 40 is a good medium number, are experiencing some kind of dramatic depression or anxiety issues. Mm-hmm. And they're really struggling. So the chance that your child or someone is struggling and maybe not even telling you is a pretty big number. And that's no way to live, being depressed, being anxious. And we need to do something about it. So my pivot has really been towards, we started tellmystory.org. I did another film called What I Wish My Parents Knew, which is a 45-minute documentary where I just interview kids talking about their mental health. And we're putting that into schools right now. So we're saying, here is 45 minutes of you listening to kids talk about their mental health. It's a parent program, followed by 45 minutes of a mental health professional talking about what you just saw and what you can do, and sending you to tellmystory.org to learn more, where we're still building that out. I think we should have it completely built out by the end of summertime. It's got great resources now, but it'll have better resources. And to sum it all up, my mission now is to really help parents understand that if we're going to help our kids through all of this, we as parents need to own our kids' mental health the way we own our kids' physical health, because there's no one else to do it.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And, as I've done a peripheral deep dive, I suppose, into the stuff that you've put out there and just your content and your videos and your interviews and things like that, your TED Talks, I watched both. And I think the theme that I'm seeing across a lot of those is several things. So I think first, it's easy to not know what you don't know and live in naivete, I suppose, to where we're not recognizing things that if we knew what we should be looking for, we would see it right away. And then I think further, it's easy to diminish feelings or almost dismiss what kids are going through as if it's trivial, or in the grand scheme that really doesn't matter. That kid that's being mean to you at school, it's really not that big of a deal. You lost your girlfriend or your boyfriend to a breakup and you'll be fine. Everyone has broken hearts. And I think that it's easy for us to as adults, because one of the things that we talk about all the time on the podcast is we are intellectual, rational, cognitive beings as adults, and kids are emotional, and kids do not have abstract reasoning into sometimes adolescence. So what's going on is they're living in these feelings, and these feelings are absolutely real and absolutely overwhelming and absolutely all consuming for them. But the adult brain looks at it and dismisses and diminishes and undermines the value of it because it's no big deal to us. And so I think that one of the things you talk about a lot is advocate for our kids' mental health. But I think first we have to understand what that means and, practically speaking, how we do that. Because especially my audience, I mean, we've been on this journey a long time. This podcast started a long time ago, and
Good.
I know I'm thankful for them. So
Congrats.
we talk a lot about the relationship with our kids, and that is at the heart of everything. That's the play therapy model. That's the model of this podcast. Everything is through that lens. And so one of the things that I was really encouraged by with all of the content you're putting out is that the relationship really does matter, and it's being close enough and connected enough to know what to do, how to handle it, what to look for, those types of things. So that was a long introduction to say, help me understand and help the audience understand what you've been able to connect as far as practical things that would be simple for parents to implement quickly.
I think there's something that we should probably start with that talks about, here's the challenge. I've never been depressed. I don't know what it's like. The only anxiety I get is if I'm going to be late for the airport. That's it. Right. I mean, I don't know how people feel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us don't.
Right.
And what I'm going to share with you right now is, by the way, it's not just about kids.
No.
This is anyone
Right.
who's experiencing depression and anxiety. What I'm going to share with you right now is something that is for everybody. And it helps people who have never experienced it before. Because if you've experienced it, and what I'm about to tell you, go, yep, that's kind of it. And I know this because I was speaking about it for years and years and years now, which is scary on itself. But let me share this with you. I live in Southern California. Most days, if I'm going to look outside my office window, it's a blue sky. Not a cloud in the sky. If I was to stand here with someone who is depressed or anxious, they may only see clouds in that blue sky. And there's absolutely nothing I can say that's going to change their mind. Mm-hmm. There's not. What are you talking about? There's no cloud in the sky. Look again. There's nothing I can say that's going to change their mind. They're only going to see clouds because that's what they see through their eyes and their mind. And if I try to convince them there's no clouds, they're going to shut down and they're not going to want to talk to me anymore.
Right. Because their feelings don't matter.
Because their feelings don't matter. And so the only thing you can do is try to get them to talk about their clouds. Mm-hmm. Tell me about your clouds. What do they look like? How do they make you feel? Are they there all the time? Do they come and go? Are there good clouds? Are there bad clouds? What exactly do they look like? And then resist with every fiber of your body to tell them that they're wrong or that try to fix them. Because here's the thing that most people don't understand about depression and anxiety. The more you talk about it, the better it gets.
Yep.
The more you share, the better it gets. The more someone tells you how to think, the worse it gets. So parents, myself included, and husbands, by the way.
It's harder for dads
too.
I get it. It's harder for dads.
We all try to fix stuff, right? So, for every husband and wife on this journey with you, how many times has a wife said to a husband, I just want you to listen.
Don't fix my problem.
I don't need you to fix my problem. I just want to get it off my chest.
Yes.
Right?
I've said that several times, I'm pretty sure.
And as you're kind of glancing over your husband right now, I get it, right? I do the same thing. But why do we do that, right? We do that, and wives do that too. But why do we do that? Because we want to help.
Yes.
We want to take away the hurt.
Yep. We want to rescue.
We want to rescue them.
Mm-hmm.
So when you try to do that to somebody who is depressed or anxious, what you end up doing is you drive them away from you. Mm-hmm. and you drive them deeper into that depression and anxiety. And it's so counterintuitive. I get it, right? You're going, no, I know my kid, I'm going to fix him. I'm like, you know your kid, but you don't know this part of your kid.
Yeah.
And you need to get them to talk and release that pressure. Like on a pressure cooker, right? You remember those old school pressure cookers, the pressure's building up, building up, building up. You need to release that little valve at the top, and all of a sudden things get better.
Yep.
And that's what people who are depressed and anxious, they just need to release it. They need to share it. They need to talk about it.
Right.
And not be fixed, because you can't fix them.
Well, and
they
so,
have to.
Yeah, well, and they have to be able to get to that point on their own, and not solely, but with the support of other people. You know, we talk a lot about the guide rails, right? So in the playroom, we talk about the therapeutic guide rails. In the podcast, we talk about the parental guide rails. And the goal is the child is moving toward health and healing with those guide rails to kind of come alongside and support. But the guide rails aren't getting you further down the track. It has to be the child or the teen doing that work. And so there's a lot of things that have to fall into place. And I'm reminded of our skill that we talk about a lot, which is reflecting feeling. And one of the things that we talk about in that is we can't try to distract the child. We can't try to dismiss the feeling. We can't try to get them to believe or think something differently. We sit in the pocket of the feeling, and we are essentially saying, I'm here, I hear you, I understand, and I care. And so I can't fix it. I can't rescue you. I can't solve the problem. I can't make you happy. I can't do any of those things, but I can validate how you feel, and you will figure out how to get yourself out of that with the support and the understanding that someone hears you and understands. And I mean, that really resonates with our skill of reflecting feelings that we talk about a lot. So help me understand, one of the phrases I hear you say a lot is the world has changed, or this isn't the world that we grew up in. So help our audience understand what you mean by that and what the implications are.
Well, your audience is probably a little bit younger than I am, right? Like I said, I'm going to be 56 this year. So, but here's what it was like when I grew up. When the phone rang, it was attached to the wall.
Yep, with a cord.
With a cord. And my father would answer it. He would then decide if you were allowed to speak on the phone, how long you were allowed to speak on the phone for. And he would stand there while you spoke on the phone. When I grew up, there were a couple of TV channels when I was 13 or 14. That was it. You watch a couple of shows, you go outside and play. We didn't know anything about the news. Like I grew up in a time, in the early 70s, there was stuff going on. I don't know what it was. It didn't matter to me because I didn't read the news. I was 12, 13, 14 years of age. I didn't care. I had bigger stuff to deal with. Like where am I going to build a play for it? And who am I going to play with this weekend?
Yeah.
Right. Those were my issues. So that was the world then. And now you fast forward to the world now where, this is in everybody's pocket and they have access to the entire world. And you think about a kid right now, when you take a look at the stats that are coming out, and if on what I wish my parents knew, I'm interviewing kids are going, when I was 7 and 8 years old, I knew I was different. I knew there was a problem. 7 and 8 year olds are calling the suicide hotline at just crazy numbers right now. So why is that happening? Well, because it's a different world. Like a 7 or 8 year old kid now has to worry about whether the world's going to end in 10 years because of climate change, whether the debt ceiling is going to actually get extended or the world's going to collapse that way, if there's going to be a nuclear war with Russia, or is it going to be with China? Can I get into college because it's so much different than it used to be, and how am I going to pay for it? And oh my gosh, what is this whole stock market mortgage crossing interest rate thing and inflation? They're thinking about that at 7 years old. So if any anxiety they had about the fact that their friends ditched them on the weekend is now compounded by all the stuff that makes it feel almost impossible for some of them to move on.
Yeah, heavier.
And we're all struggling with the same thing, right? We're those same issues that I just brought up to you, everybody's thinking about. Yeah. And we're struggling with whether or not what's really going to happen. But imagine your 7, 8-year-old, 12-year-old child who's seeing the same stuff you're seeing. Again, my father read the news. I didn't.
Right.
It's different.
Mm-hmm. And
that causes depression. It causes anxiety. It just compounds everything.
Right. And so along that vein, my book, Device Detox, that's one of my greatest passions, is the dangers of kids and screens and access to screens and time spent on screens and what that's doing neurobiologically, what's that doing chemically. I mean, there's so much there, and I unpack that in the book. But that's something that when I watched the portions of your documentary and your, not both really, Tell My Story and What I Wish My Parents Knew, what I kept seeing over and over again is adults and kids alike commenting on the influence of social media, the influence of internet access, the influence of how much time they're spent playing video games. And so speak a little bit about, in your conversations with teens for your documentary and in your research for all the things that you've been putting out there, what are you seeing as far as how screens are playing into this?
I mean, if I could take away screens, I would. I just think we can't.
So would I.
I'd love to say, I'd love to go back to like no one carries a phone in their pocket, right? But that genie's out of the bottle and it's not going back in. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, when you actually have conversations with kids and they're raw and they're real and they're vulnerable, they all know Instagram's terrible for them.
Yep.
They all know TikTok's terrible for them. Snapchat, if it's still around, I have no clue.
Yep, it is. My kids talk about it all the time in sessions.
Yeah, Facebook is bad for us as adults and kids. So all this stuff where you're viewing another world or someone else's world and comparing it to your own is not healthy for any of us. And that's a lot of what happens, right? I mean, let's ignore climate change and the wars and blah, 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 blah. It's that person has more stuff than I have. That person has a happier life than I have. And what Instagram and all this stuff doesn't show is that when you really take a look who is depressed, who is anxious, and who is unfortunately suicidal amongst teens, it has nothing to do with how famous you are on Instagram. I mean, kids who are struggling, the quarterback and the head cheerleader and the prom queen and the prom king are struggling at the same rates, if not even greater rates in some ways than the kid who's not. We all think it's like this is the challenge, right? This is what I missed with Ryan. Ryan was class clown. He was good grades. He was great. I didn't think there was anything wrong with the kid, but deep down he was struggling and not sharing it. So that we're all shocked by when the quarterback does something terrible or is depressed or takes their life, but they're struggling the same way the rest of us are, because we're all the same. Deep down, when you get past the shell of whoever we look like, we're all the same, right? We are all vulnerable. We're all scared. We just may not show it the same way. The bully that you're so angry at, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be angry at your bully, might have deeper issues than you even have a clue about.
Yeah.
A lot of bullies struggle more than, that's why they're bullies.
That's
right?
exactly right.
They're worse off than the rest of us.
The people who are the hardest to love need love the most, usually.
Yeah. I mean, you know that better than I mean, that's what you do for a living. It's an education thing. It's a conversation thing from my mind. Mm-hmm. What are you doing to talk to your kids about social media? What are you doing to talk to your kids about what they see in the world? What does your dinner conversation consist of? Are you having dinner conversations where you can actually sit down and talk about, okay, what did you see on Instagram? What did you see on Facebook? What was on Snapchat? Do you understand? Like, what do you feel about that? Well, how does it make you feel when you see that? And how should you feel when you see that?
Yeah. And it's interesting.
The press is, I mean, I would also eliminate, I don't want to sound, communist, but the way the press deals with stuff right now to try and just get clickbait and ratings, it's not helping any of us.
No.
This whole deal with the debt ceiling crap that's going on right now, it's like, does anyone really believe that the United States is going to not solve the debt crisis? That we've solved it every time for the last 50 years, 100 years. We'll solve it again, and we're not going to default on our debt. But the news makes it sound like we're all going to go into some major issue and blah, 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 blah. It's like, I wish we could fix that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, one of the struggles is finding the balance, right? So it's not only we need to have conversations if our kids have screens and they have access to the internet and social media. And I mean, I suppose most teens do, even if it's not on a phone, they have access at school, they have access with their friends. So I mean, they're going to be able to see it. And so it's not only the conversations that we have to have, but it's awareness of what is being put into their minds and what they're able to, you can find anything you're looking for, right? So if you're searching up healthy recipes, you can find that, but very quickly it can become anorexic content, right? And you can look up, how do you feel when you're depressed? And it can very quickly become suicidal ideation content. And so I think one of the struggles is not only having the conversations, but being aware that access needs to be monitored. And we need to be aware of what our kids are seeing, because conversations are helpful, but we need to filter that to a degree and understand what they're being exposed to and whether or not that's moving us toward health and happiness or whether it's moving us in the other direction.
Well, I always talk about people when you want to talk to your kids, just don't barge into their room, because that's the worst time to actually try to have a conversation. But that's the only space they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only little space they have in the world where they only feel protected is that little room, and you're barging in. So please, as parents, try not to do that. Mm-hmm. And I did it tons of times, so I'm not judging you for doing it. But the thing I do say, respect that space, but this, no.
Right.
You own that. They're not paying the bill. They're not old enough to pay the bill or get the phone. And you have every right to look at what's on that phone, and you should. Mm-hmm. You absolutely should.
Yeah. And that's, you speak a lot about advocating for your child's mental health. And I think that's one of the most important ways that we advocate, right? Because, I've said to my son since he was probably 10 years old, he's 13 now, but I've said when he was, younger, asking when he's going to get a phone and when he's going to be able to have access to internet and things like that. And I've always said, your brain isn't ready for that. And it's my job to keep you safe. And so if I'm doing my job, the answer has to be no. And he's heard that so many times that he will recite it to me now. And so, he'll say, can I play video games? And I'll say, it's Wednesday. There's no video games on Wednesday. Why? Yep. Because it's my job to keep you safe. And kids always understand safety. They won't like it. They will rebel against it. They will fight against it, but they can't argue with your job keeping them safe. And I talk about that a lot with parents. Like, look, default to it's my job to keep you safe, because no child's going to say, I don't want you to keep me safe, right? Like, there's no child that's going to say that.
Well, and you can get deeper into this, and as you peel back the onion, too many parents these days want to be their kids' friends. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to put in rules that are going to hurt them or upset them or frustrate them. And if you peel back the onion even more on that, it's because so many parents these days, if you take a look at the amount of connections that adults have as friends now compared to what they did 30 or 40 years ago, we have less friends, right? I mean, I'm not sure why.
Because of screens.
Probably because of screens. But, so we have less friends. So because we have less friends, we want to be friendly with the people around us. And because our kids are around us, we think we're going to be friends with our kids. That's not your job.
Right.
Your job's to keep them safe. Your job's to raise them.
Right. And
it's hard, right? And because you're like, you've had a tough day and you want somebody to talk to. And I'm not saying don't be vulnerable with your kids, because I think there's a degree of vulnerability that allows your kids to talk. And what I always say is, I wasn't vulnerable with my kids. I mean, my kids saw me as the guy who built all these companies and coached the CEOs and did all blah, 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 blah stuff I've done. Right. And I never cried. They never saw me have a bad day, because I put on a mask when I came home and hid it from them. My wife and kids never knew the fact that, I failed at 25 companies. Ignore the ones that I've been successful at. I literally lost millions and millions and millions of dollars, almost lost the house multiple times. Nobody knew that. But that's how I showed up. And therefore, Ryan, when he was having his challenges, probably looked at life and went, my dad's got his life together. It must be me. So I'm not saying don't be vulnerable. I should have been more vulnerable. I should have talked more about, I had a bad day today. Someone was irritating me, and gave him the opportunity to say, well, I had a bad day today. But I always sound like I never had a bad day. And therefore, I don't think he was as willing to bring up his bad days.
Sure.
Now, do not walk into the house and tell your wife and kids, your wife, yes, but your kids, we're going to lose the house next week if I don't do something. Bad idea.
I agree. Age appropriate truth.
Age appropriate truth, but it's being, and this is more of my generation than it's like your generation. We were raised to not show people how we feel. Right? You take the average 50-year-old guy, we don't share our feelings very much.
Well, and I think that speaks to a lot of cyclical and familial patterns, right? Because we talk about this a lot on the podcast. We typically either parent the way we were parented, or we decide we had some issue with the way we were parented. So then we try to about face and do something completely opposite. But usually the complete opposite is also unhealthy. So like, my dad was too strict, so I'm going to be a doormat that, my kids walk all over.
I'm going to go free range parenting.
Yes. So there's usually, I parent the way I was parented, or I do a complete 180 and then I'm probably not parenting well on the other end of the spectrum either. And I think, to speak to, in your generation, Gen Xers, they have a very unique perspective on the world, and it's question authority, and it's, be the hackers and the defectors and all of that. And that matters, right? Because we're raising a generation. I mean, think about the millennial generation. They get a lot of bad press, but they get, actually in recent times, they've actually been getting a lot of positive press. And
I don't think I've read any of that.
They're giving more.
I'm just kidding.
This is what fascinated me. I'll give them credit. They are giving more generous tithing and donations and giving than any other group in the world right now. They are giving more of their money away for good causes than any other generation. And so here's what's fascinating to me. We have to keep in mind that the way we were raised, the generation in which we grew up, our family dynamic, all of that influences the now. And sometimes we don't make those connections, right? And so I think it's powerful to say, look, I grew up and, my dad monitored who I talked to on the phone and for how long. And if he said no, that was it. And therefore that influenced the way you parent, right? And then it's recognizing, but I'm missing the connection. I'm missing the vulnerability. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot. So the illustration that we use is everyone avoids vulnerability at all costs. Just human nature. It's not comfortable being vulnerable. And so when we demonstrate a negative emotion, it's almost always anger to mask the reality of what we're feeling. So we present as angry or aggressive, but the reality is it's that we're embarrassed or we're guilty or we're ashamed or we're disappointed or we're frustrated or we're something else. And so to speak to vulnerability, kids avoid vulnerability too.
Absolutely.
So when we are trying to connect and we're trying to relate, and there's these moments that are taking place that are really have the potential to be meaningful, vulnerability has to be involved. And that's difficult on all sides. But the only way that happens is through trust and acceptance and relationship. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot on the podcast is the relationship is at the heart of everything, and everything else flows out of that. So, I think it was really important to address the fact that we need to be approachable, right? We have to be vulnerable so that our kids see that our emotions are the same as theirs and our experiences are the same as theirs. And that opens up conversations more readily than if they feel like we don't have that connection with them.
Well, and I'm sure you get this too, but a lot of times I get, okay, Jay, I got that. And it makes sense. And I want to do something about it. I want a better connection with my kids. I want to talk to my kids. And they will not talk to me. They won't talk to me. So tell me how to talk to my kids. And I'm like, wow, I can't tell you how to talk to your kids. But I can tell you a couple of things about how not to talk to your kids. Like, don't barge in their room. Listen and try not to fix them. Just if the more you listen, the more they're going to be more open, and try to create that relationship that maybe you don't have right now. And understand this, you might have done it wrong your entire parenting career so far, but that doesn't mean you can't change. It doesn't mean you have to give up.
Right.
Your kids are never lost.
Nope.
They may come back to you in their 20s, might be in their 30s, but they'll come back to you. You're still their parents, and they always come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to believe. And I get it, right? So I know that, after losing Ryan, my daughter and I had a falling out. A lot over the fact that I was very vocal and going out and tell my story. And even though she was in the movie, she just didn't want to be part of how vocal I was. And my wife wasn't part of any of it. And still, we all grieve differently. And we're great, by the way. So that's not an issue. But yeah, my daughter and I didn't talk for 2.5 years. And she had every reason to believe that all of her challenges in her life were because of me. And maybe she was right. But over time, staying focused, not giving up, she's getting married next month in June. And
That's
I'm actually
awesome.
doing the ceremony. So I think that if you try, you can always come back. So, and it's just a matter of just never give up as much as you want to give up. Trust me, I've been there. I've been called very terrible things by my daughter over the years. There's something about 18 to 22-year-old girls that sometimes these days are challenging for a lot of people. But you just can't give up. But something that we've done with my team and my partners to try and help the situation is we have a new album coming out with BMG Music called Songs for the Drive Home. And we created this because we're going, okay, how do you talk to your kids? And we believe that music is that great connector, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can go to any part of the world and not even understand the words to the songs you're listening to, but you're suddenly in a small restaurant and somewhere, and you're listening to this music and everybody's having a great time, and you're now connected with all those people because the music connects you.
Mm-hmm.
So we believe that music is the great connector, my writing partners and I. So we wrote this album, which is basically 10 songs. There's a side A and a side B. Side A is for younger kids. Side B is for older kids. But it's meant to be listen to these songs you drive home. And it's kind of in a Jack Johnson-y style. We've got a bunch of different artists and singers on them. We've got a bunch of kids who are singing on them, some of them. We've got 10 videos that go along. The videos are just dropping today. It's what's the date today? The 15th of May.
Yeah.
They're all up on BMG's site. We can put a link in the show notes. And everything comes out on Spotify, yada, yada, all next week. But this is like meant for you to be able to go, okay, put this on in your car, drive home, and see what happens.
Right.
See if it sparks a conversation. You'll probably enjoy the music, and it'll likely spark a conversation with your kids. So you have to try a whole bunch of different things.
Yes.
Because your kids are never going to talk to you, as you know, Brenna, when you want them to talk to you.
Right.
They're going to talk to you on their schedule. My wife always says, like, our oldest, right? Derek and her, they love each other, but they only talk, once every couple of weeks meaningfully, where I talk to them every day. She talks to my daughter every day. I talk to my daughter every couple of days, right? Every once a week. But when she knows when Derek's ready to talk, she has to drop everything.
Yeah.
She has to absolutely, no matter what she's got going on, she's dropping it.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's going to want to spend an hour or so talking.
Yeah.
And if she says no at that particular time, it may be another couple of weeks before that moment comes up again.
Right.
And that's not inconsistent with a lot of kids.
No, not at all.
Parenting is very inconvenient.
Oh, yes. And, one of the principles that we talk about a lot is a 30-second burst of attention, and it goes along the same vein. And so the idea is when your kids are begging for your attention, it's almost always at the most inconvenient time.
Absolutely.
And
always.
So it's very easy to say, hang on, hold on, not right now, give me a minute, I'm busy. And there's always a reason why we can't provide what they need in that moment. And the theory of the 30-second burst of attention is we think I can't give you time right now, but most of the time they really don't need more than 30 seconds. And so it's this premise of you can give your child 30 seconds, even when it seems inconvenient, even when you're doing 8 things at once. 30 seconds is nothing. And if it requires more than 30 seconds, you can always circle back. But usually the 30 seconds is like, hey, I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I want the connection. So whatever it is you need, I'm willing to give it to you. And speaking of the car ride home, I think that's such a clever idea because They've actually done studies that some of the most meaningful conversations between parents and kids take place in car rides because it is a closed environment. You can't get out and go somewhere else. And it's quiet and it's pensive and it's opportunities to talk. And the whole premise of play therapy is that when you are actively doing something, it is easier to have conversation. And so when you're in a car and you're going somewhere, there's enough distraction that your inhibitions are lessened and you're willing to just randomly say things. And I've had so many parents say, I love driving kids to school because they sit in the back seat and they just start talking. And I get so much insight and awareness when they just are talking in the car. And so I love the idea of the album. I think that's going to be so helpful. And really, it's about meeting kids where they are. You know, you said a lot of parents say, my kids won't talk to me. What do I do? Well, I think you already alluded to some of them. You don't give up on them, right? You keep trying no matter what. Perseverance is important. But furthermore, meet them where they are. You know, a lot of times kids aren't verbal. A lot of times kids aren't rational. So we can't necessarily expect them to tell us things right off the bat. But what we can do is say, hey, I saw you're working on this. I just want to sit and watch what you're doing. Or go ahead.
No, I was going to, another thing about cars is like, you think, and Dr. Mark Goulston is a good buddy of mine, and he does a lot of stuff with me, and he's fantastic at dealing with kids, and he was a psychiatrist, and I can go on for hours about him. But here's one of the big things he says: you want to know why the car works so well with kids? Because they don't want to look you in the eye.
True.
They don't want to look you in the eye. They want to talk to you, but they don't want to look at you because it's hard for them. Yeah. It's scary. It's intimidating. They're young, right? And I was just thinking about this about today. I'm going, why does that work? Like, but think about it. I grew up Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore, but I grew up Catholic, right? So when I went to confession, how does a confessional set up?
Side by side.
Side by side, and you don't look at the priest in the eyes because he will intimidate you and he won't say what's on your mind. So they purposely did it so you don't have to talk. You don't have to look in the eye, but you can say what's on your mind. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the same thing with the car ride home with your kids.
Right.
They don't have to look you in the eye, and you're not going to look in the eye because you got to drive, right? Mm-hmm. And they know and they feel safe because they know you're not going to start them.
Right.
They know you're not going to look deeply in their eyes and steal their soul. It's not going to happen.
Right. And so imagine, I mean, kids aren't verbal. Kids don't have abstract reasoning. Kids aren't rational, right? So you have all of these expectations of kids coming to our worlds. I want you to talk to me. I want you to tell me what's going on. I want you to be honest with me. I want you to tell me the truth. I want you to... And the reality is we have to go to them. Developmentally, they are not able to come to us. It's not an unwillingness. We talk about this all the time. A lot of parents will say, well, they just refuse. No, they're not able to. It's not an unwillingness. Developmentally, they're not there. So if we go to them and just give them the space to feel and to express whatever they want to express, it doesn't always have to be verbally. It doesn't always have to be in conversation, but they're not opposed to it. And so you give them an environment like a car ride where it's not so intimidating and overwhelming, and they're a little bit more likely to be vulnerable with what they actually want to share. The whole dynamic shifts. And the cool thing about kids and parents and relationships is that the micro experiences add up to the total. And so there's, you know, in psychology, we talk about you have to have 7 positive things to outweigh a negative. And so that's just kind of like a general rule of thumb. If you've had a really negative experience, you need 7 positive ones to counteract it. So you might have had some negative experiences where there was no conversation, where it was frustrating on both sides, where there was an argument, there was something. But if you have 7 positive micro experiences, all of a sudden the kid's going, yeah, I don't actually mind talking to mom and dad anymore. I don't actually mind having those moments and sharing what's going on because I've had enough positive experiences where I'm realizing that it's not as bad as I thought. And those are huge for kids because one experience begets the next.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's hard raising kids.
Yeah.
And it's not hard raising kids at the same time.
True.
And it's just about recognizing that, you know, we all make mistakes. We're going to screw up. We're going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. That's part of being human. and just never give up and keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
If you're coming from your heart space and all about love, then eventually it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
And put down the damn phone at the dinner table, because that's not the place for it.
Right.
And have a dinner. I mean, this is the thing that I wrote a book called Dinner Conversations. When everybody was younger and Ryan was around, we would have a dinner and we'd all just tell funny stories. And then we'd pick the funniest story of the night, and I would post that on Facebook, because I like Facebook for fun stuff. And then we'd like to see who would comment on the funny story that we posted. It's always, so we'd all vote on who had the funniest story at the dinner table, and that became like a little game we'd play, right? And then
I would have lost every night, Jay. I'm just letting you know. I don't think I would have ever won the funniest story of the night.
My wife never won. My wife would sit back and just look like it was always me and the kids, right?
It is what it is. I get it.
And so after years of doing that, I think it did for like 5 years, and people come, you need to turn this into a book. So Ryan, his last summer, I had him download as his job for the summer all of the stuff, all the Facebook posts, we turned into a book called Dinner Conversations. And I'm not suggesting you go buy it, and that's not my point here. My point here is that I loved how we grew up as a family. There was no TV on. I always had music in the background because that's my thing. But we never had a TV going. We never had an iPad at the dinner table. You never had a phone at the dinner table. And dinner was never a rush to finish dinner and move on. Dinner was always an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
quality
and we
time.
all talk and we tell stories and we laugh. And that was, for me, one of the most important things about being a dad, is getting people around the dinner table and making them talk.
Yeah.
And having stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because as humans, we weren't meant to be here. We were meant to be around a campfire telling stories. That's who we are. We've only been this for, 20 years, whatever the hell it's been.
Yeah.
But we were meant for our entire history to be gathered around as a family telling stories. We're storytelling. We are the storytelling animals.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't tell stories, we're not true to ourselves. And I believe that is messing with our brains and messing with how we developed, because we don't have those human connections anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you can create that around your own dinner table.
Right.
And your kids will fight you on it. If you're going to say, Jay, you understand, every dinner table, the kids are texting and I'm texting and my wife's texting, and it's great. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to say I'm going to stop that, but it's right. Mm-hmm. You could say I've smoked my entire life. It's not right. So when you stop, it's probably hard, but it's best for you. You can say I've drank my entire life, and you say, well, maybe you should stop and it'd be better for you. This is the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's an addiction.
Right.
Being on your phone around your family is an addiction that you can change.
Yes.
And you'll be better off for it.
Right. And it's the acknowledgement of why, right? We talk about why a lot in the podcast, and that's one of my hallmark perspectives on the world is get to the why of everything. And, I guess start with why, that famous TED Talk, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it comes from there, but we have to understand when we make hard choices and when we do hard things, we fall apart if there isn't a why. And if the why is my family is the most important thing to me, my kids are the most important thing to me, I'm willing to do anything to ensure that I preserve the relationship and preserve the connection, and that they feel safe with me and they feel that they can trust me and that they know how much I care about them. And why matters, right? And so
why matters.
Hard things are necessary, but they're worth it when we have the why. And, one of the things that we talk about in the podcast a lot is when you have relationship, everything else will naturally evolve in a positive way. And you can't have relationship staring at a screen. You can't have relationship in different rooms. You can't have relationships when you have earphones in and your iPad in front of you and all of that. So connection happens with face-to-face conversation, and around a dinner table is perfect. In a car ride is perfect. But there are other ways too, right? Schedule a 30-minute time to take your dog for a walk with your kid and have your kid come with you. Amazing conversations happen on walks too, because again, you're not looking at each other, right? indigenous people of many tribes, at their rite of passage, they go on 3-day walks with the sage of the village. Why? Because it's the most meaningful conversation and learning that can take place. So,
or on their own.
yes, sometimes they go off on their own because you have nothing but time to think. And, we've taken away the why, I think, often because digital pacifiers are easy. And parenting shouldn't be easy, and raising kids shouldn't be easy. And we have to understand the significance of that.
Yep. And I think that it's important to understand, this is the first time I actually brought this up in a podcast, but I've been thinking about it a lot. It's going to get worse.
Yes.
And it's going to get worse with the advent of AI and ChatGPT as an example, and how fast that's growing and how fast it's taking over, and how it can take, the law exam and pass with flying colors, whereas 3 months ago it couldn't. Here's what's going to happen to our world, right? If you're connected on this and you're all about how you write your emails and how you write your stuff, it's not going to matter so much anymore. The most successful people in the world will become those that communicate with their voice.
Right.
Because that's going to be something that AI can't take away. But AI is going to take away a lot of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel that your future, your child's future is behind a screen typing, I could argue that all that goes away. You need to be able to convince your kids and teach your kids how to tell a story and how to talk and how to communicate and how to be out in the world, because we are now shifting back into that culture of being around the campfire, and the most meaningful conversations will be around the campfire, person to person, because you can't trust what you read. We already can't trust what we read.
Right.
So if you're going to say, how do I help make my kids have a better life, and how do I help my kids fit in better? How do I help my kids be successful? You teach them how to talk.
Right. Teach them about the meaning of relationships.
Teach them the meaning of relationships, how to communicate, how to tell a good story, how to be not drone on for things that bore the crap out of people, it's like, if I could tell people what to do around the dinner table, it'd be like, teach them how to tell a story. Mm-hmm. A succinct, funny, good story, or a succinct, funny, important story that gets people's attention. You go, wow, I want to hear more from that person. Mm-hmm. Not I want to hear less because they drone on and on and on about stuff that doesn't make any sense. Teach them how to tell a story. Teach them, because stories are the basis of relationships, and the relationships are the basis of everything.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Well, I don't think we can end on a better note than that. So tell the audience and the listeners how they can find you. Obviously, it'll all be in show notes, but just give us websites or wherever you think would be best for us to go.
So tellmystory.org. We'll have everything up there. You can see the movie Tell My Story on Amazon Prime and other streaming services. The only way you can see what I wish my parents knew is by helping me bring it to your school. There's a trailer up there, and you can access information. My team will respond to you. If you want to talk to me, you can reach me through them. I'm happy to talk to you about what's going on with your school. I want to get this in the fall into as many schools as possible. I want this going into churches. And by the way, if you own a business and you haven't caught on to this yet, you're not losing time. You are losing time to COVID. You are losing time to the flu. You're losing most of your time and most of your productivity to the mental wellness of your people, and the fact that your people are looking after their kids who are having mental wellness issues. And that's where you're losing your time. And you need to train all of your executives and your middle managers and your people on how to deal with each other and their kids if you care about your bottom line. Because you know what? That's where you're losing your time. And I know this. I coach 20 CEOs and I own 10 companies. So I'm not making this part up. Right. I'm not making any of it up.
Yeah.
So anyways, you can see us through there. The BMG Music is putting out the album. Yeah. That'll be in the show notes, because I actually don't know the site off the top of my head. And it will be within 10 days. It'll be on Spotify and all the streaming services. So I really hope that you take the time to try that, to drive with your kids and listen to a couple of songs and have a conversation.
I hope so too, because there's nothing more important than the moments of relational connection with our kids, and their mental health depends on it, and it all stems from that. So Jay, thank you so much. It was so good to have you. I'm so grateful. And
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a special interview episode with Jason Reid from tellmystory.org. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that you enjoyed it. And I hope that it inspires you to take your children's mental health seriously and that you have some tools and some skills to take home and implement to make sure that we're raising happy and healthy kids. Since this is my very first interview, I would love to hear from you. I get requests for interviews all the time, and I usually say no, but I'm curious if you would like to have more paired interviews with people that align with what we typically talk about on the podcast. So please reach out to me. I would love to hear from you, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com, and let me know if you thought this was beneficial, if you'd like me to do this more frequently, and if you think that this would be something you'd like to have me do on a semi-consistent basis. As always, thank you so much for being a part of the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast family. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.